Forsaken North, that's the hashtag we're using this evening. Do go ahead and join that conversation. Right now, we'd like to add a few voices to this conversation, though expert voices, that is. Linda Ogutu is sitting down with a panel. We're going to delve into this issue of insecurity in northeastern Kenya right now and give us a few insights into that. Over to you, Linda.
Nancy, thank you. Of course, we have expert opinion on this, people who have dealt with security all over the world, and probably will help us to understand what's going on along the northeastern border of Kenya. In studio, my immediate right, I have Byron Adera, ex-Special Forces. We have Andrew Franklin, resident security analyst, and of course we have Peter Alingo from the Institute for Security Studies, and we have Masood Mwenye, spokesperson, National Police Service. He's joining us from our I&M studios, that is in City Center. If you missed the names of the men we'll be having a conversation with this evening, we have my immediate right, we have Byron Adera, ex-Special Forces, we have Andrew Franklin, security analyst, we have Peter Alingo from Institute for Security Studies, and then at our I&M studios in town, we have Masood Mwenye. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on KTN Prime tonight. Here's the concern for me though. Today's ambush comes just days after the alleged militia went into the same village. That was last week. They rounded up the residents, put them in one place. They preached for over 6 hours. They ended up hoisting their flag at a police force, and then they left. So a few days later, that is yesterday night, these men were back. Alingo, let me start with you. It seems like you have a militia that is able to cross in and out of the country. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there is a big problem here, and the Kenya-Somali border, as it were, is increasingly becoming a bigger problem for this government, for us as Kenyans, and that is what we need to focus on. What is the problem there? Yes, we know the border is porous and people can cross in and out, but we know there is a problem. That problem resides in Somalia, across the border the other side. But that is not just it. That problem is also on this other side of the border, within Kenya. So we have a problem that transcends the border, crosses the border, a problem of a transboundary nature that has its origins in Somalia, but now getting entrenched, deeply rooted into Kenya, within us as Kenyans, within the society, within the community, particularly in the northeastern part of this country. We need to deal with that. How do we deal with that? We must begin to ask ourselves very, very difficult questions, and those are the things that we need to address. We have a border that is porous. We know that yes, the border can be crossed in and out. What do we do about it in order to safeguard the security of the borders in terms of people who cross in and out of that border? In this particular instance, it is extremely disturbing that we have a situation where people come in, ambush a village, do what they want to do there, go back again, leave a warning saying they will come back,
and they actually
including hoisting their flag there, and actually they come back, and they just have a free day, in terms of doing, there is a problem here.
Andrew Franklin, basically this problem is bigger than we think along the Kenyan Somali border. What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are that Al-Shabaab has changed its operational tactics. That Al-Shabaab is in fact focusing on the visit of President Obama on July 25th. The attacks actually started ramping up 7 days ago, at the beginning of last week, when a police post was overrun. We're still not quite certain what happened there. There have been attacks in Somalia as well against KDF positions and the like. Then last Wednesday and then Thursday nights, 2 successive nights in a row, Al-Shabaab, 40, 50 troops come in, occupy mosques, preach for hours and hours, say we're coming back, to actually ambush, to plant landmines. In other words, and then ambush a follow-on force of police who, had whatever number of casualties they had. They left their weapons behind, disappeared into the bush. This is a ramping up of al-Shabaab activity, which is focusing on the visit by President Obama on the 25th of July.
Their main objective
its objective is to embarrass the government of Kenya, to demonstrate how the government of Kenya is losing control of its border regions. In other words, we are developing ungoverned spaces along the Somalia-Kenya border, and ultimately, the high-value targets will be attacked in and around Nairobi on certain dates. We can expect attacks possibly on the first anniversary of Mpeketoni, which is coming up. The 4th of July in and around Nairobi will be a key date. The objective is to force Obama not to come, to cancel his trip at the last minute, because that visit has already been reduced from 2 days to roughly 8 hours. And, you know, if the country becomes untenable, ungovernable, and it appears to be ungovernable, and al-Shabaab is very good with its media. We know that. They were taking film of Mpeketoni, which I was certainly not aware of when you were interviewing me there on June 16th. But they then released that film showing in early March of this year to remind us, almost as a recruiting film, to show us what they had previously done. Since then, we've had 2 massacres in Mandera. We had the Garissa University massacre. The fact is that we are not in control of our border regions, and our police are increasingly overstretched.
Byron, let me bring you into this conversation. This is my concern. Last week, when this group went to Yumbis, they went, preached, hosted the flag, and then left. And of course, there were allegations that the man who was leading this group was a gentleman known as Mohammed Kuno Elias Gamadere. There's a bounty on his head, I think, if I'm correct, about 20 million shillings on his head. So one would have imagined the security forces would beef up security in that region. One, you have one of the most wanted men leading this operation, and then 2, you now know they have the ability to cross in and out of the Kenyan border. So you'd expect beefed up security in the area.
Okay, I'd want to say the change does happen, but when we do not appreciate that change, then we miss out on very crucial lessons that, you know, like they say, the history of correction is actually the graveyard of abandoned fads. If you do not take that into account, then you run the risk of being part of the grave yourself. Now, having mentioned that, you know, the fact that the border is really porous is not new knowledge, so to speak. It's been there with us for quite some time. I think there's effort that's put in place to, you know, get things done, you know, the wall construction and all the rest that comes with that. But then in terms of numbers, and I did speak about that the other day, it's not really a fanciful, you know, strategy, unless those numbers actually make sense. We could refer this to, you know, a psychological, you know, science that's been invested in terms of so much research in the past, and you could learn from that. If you do not have people centered and have a lot of authenticity and, you know, focus on their jobs, motivated, and actually doing exactly what they're supposed to do.
Are you talking about the police force now?
Exactly. So the increase in numbers in terms of having a lot of show of force, because this happened and we got a couple of guys rushing in to do this and that, is for me very cosmetic if it's not making sense, if the numbers are not really applied to the tasks at hand. So basically missing the big point in terms of the true picture of the reality, which we have not awoken to.
Okay. Just to hold on to that thought, let's bring in Masood Mwenye, spokesperson, National Police Service. He's joining us from our I&M studio. Masood, thank you for joining us on KTN Prime. We're looking at what happened in Yumbis and the ambush that happened yesterday night. And this is an ambush that has raised a lot of questions in terms of security, in terms of manning the northeastern Kenyan border, that is the Kenyan border with Somalia. And Byron is in studio with us and he's saying probably the problem lies with the numbers. You need to show your might along that Kenyan border so that whoever it is, be it al-Shabaab, gets the idea that this is a country that is well prepared for anything. What sort of numbers do you have on the ground? And before you even get there, what exactly happened in Yumbis yesterday night?
Thank you, Linda, and allow me to appreciate your inviting us to share in the perspective. As we said in the day, and we issued 2 statements. The first statement was to basically bring the country to speed on what happened, and the second statement was now to put things in a better perspective. You will note that there were so many items of information flying left, right and center, mostly misleading, some of the items of information also creating a lot of fear and unnecessary tension to the country. But we corrected that. And as you may now be aware, our officers were engaged by bandits, terrorists particularly for that matter. As the outcome was that we lost one officer who succumbed to injuries as he was being prepared for evacuation to the hospital. 4 officers have been successfully evacuated to Nairobi for treatment. 2 vehicles have been destroyed. 2 have been salvaged, including 1 lorry which is totally intact. So basically that is the situation on the ground. But again, further to that, we want to say that massive operation has since been launched there. And this brings us to the issue which you are raising. What are our numbers? A combined force from the National Police Service, the Kenya Defence Forces, and other law enforcement agencies are on the ground. But we must appreciate that, as every speaker said, this is an issue which we all know about. The war being waged against us as Kenyans is clear to everybody. And it is not because we in the National Police Service lack the ability or the urge or the drive to fight this war. We are doing everything that we can. And that is why...
Let me just interject a little bit, Masood. You're saying it's not like you lack the ability to do this, but what kind of numbers in terms of personnel are we looking at in northeastern Kenya?
We have almost 6 units there. Besides the National Police Service and the Kenya Defence Forces, we have specialized units. The Rural Border Patrol Unit is there. The Rapid Deployment Unit is there. The GSU is there. And this now brings in totality quite a heavy contingent of officers on the ground. And I don't think that it will be fair for people to assume that the police out there are idling around. As this incident was happening yesterday, these officers were actually on patrol in the evening, knowing the intensity of the area, knowing the responsibility bestowed on them. They were out in the field patrolling. Unfortunately, this happened. So we must give credit, particularly to the officers, because they are saying, we don't care whether we are few. We'll still go out and protect our country.
Okay. And I'm going to start with you, Byron, and I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot, but I'll ask this question nonetheless. There is this concern that when KDF went into Somalia in 2011, the idea was to cripple Al-Shabaab. But then there is this school of thought that maybe in crippling Al-Shabaab, some of the Al-Shabaab members now moved away from Somalia and got into Kenya. That is why you have a scenario of a militia group that is able to cross in and out. They seem to know their way around. They seem to know what they're doing. Is that a school of thought that you'd buy into?
From the strategy perspective, to a given extent, I'd want to say that if you look at the US, for example, the war against terror is all the same across several countries and into Iraq. You'd accuse the system of having failed in the post invasion strategy, and I think that could be shared in the same way as to what we're seeing in terms of solidifying internal defenses. Well and good. I mean, there's so many gains that have been, brought to a basket in terms of, annihilation and, trying to decimate the Al-Shabaab inside Somalia. There's several examples that you can shake a stick at, but it's worrying how, a lot of defenses that ought to have been thought alongside the grand strategy of invasion weren't put in place. To make sure that the post-invasion strategies remained as solid, just so the initiatives were kept on our side. The cross-border movements are really worrying. The kind of attacks, brazen attacks, so to speak, in terms of daylight, the changes in terms of strategies, it's now moved to more like psychological, in the sense that they got all the power to kill you, and they could round you up, get you into a mosque and do preaching for about 2 hours or so, and then they go disappear in the thin air, and days after that they come back and manage to get set up a very well ambush, kill or destroy equipment, vehicles, and all sorts of things. This gets us into in a region where we'd be concerned about how we manage information that we get, how we manage the change, how we get ourselves attuned to the new tactics that they are trying to exploit
Okay.
in order to, advance their interests.
Okay, Alinga, could the enemy be within?
Yes, the enemy is within as well as it is outside across the border there. But this is the question that we need to ask ourselves now moving forward. And first, we also need to empathize and sympathize with the police officers who do great job. I think we give them credit, and they do a lot of things to protect this country. There are no two ways about that. We recognize that ability, but we must talk about capacity. We must talk about ability, but we must talk about these things in the context of two things. One is the technical dynamics of the war that Kenya is facing with Al-Shabaab. Two, the political dynamics of that same war. And these are two things that need to be well understood, and appropriate responses that speak to these two aspects need to be identified. That is where we get it wrong. Al-Shabaab as a problem, the tactical things, the change of tactics that we are talking about, these are within the realm of playing politics, the political dynamics of this war, the psychological aspects of the things that we see. They speak to the political dimensions of this war. But there is also the technical dimensions that speak to one, capacity, ability of our forces. Let's not just confuse these and talk about numbers. Numbers in itself, is not enough to play this game. We have to talk about numbers in terms of the technical capacity, the technical ability of those numbers to respond and contain these attacks. We are talking about an ambush where police officers just simply ran away, leaving their weapons. It means that they were faced with a more superior, level of technical arms, and these are the things we need to speak to.
Focus on.
Then there is the political dynamics of this that we need to speak about. Is there sufficient political will that can then drive the technical aspects of this war? I think we are losing it there. There is no convergence there, and there is no sufficient drive that can, make these two dimensions be seen in a proper way, that proper responses can then be put in place. That is why we end up reacting.
Okay.
Yes.
Andrew, Franklin, quickly, do you see a scenario where Al-Shabaab is trying to create a territory of its own along the northeastern Kenyan?
Well, what I've been pointing out consistently in the last year is how Al-Shabaab is developing sanctuaries along the Somali-Kenyan border, from which it can operate against the government in Mogadishu. It is not operating against the government, to overthrow the government in Nairobi. It is carving out ungoverned spaces along our border with Somalia in the 4 frontline counties, which include Lamu. There are 5 counties now under curfew, which apparently has had no effect on the ability of Al-Shabaab, who may be already operating from within bases inside Garissa or Mandara or Tana River Delta or Wajir, to move around. I also think it's important to point out that Al-Shabaab is now operating in 40, 50-man units. This is not 4 guys going into the Garissa University College. Also, the premise that somehow Operation Linda and Chi crippled Al-Shabaab is absolutely false. In fact, as early as December 7th and December 12th, 2011, I was writing in the Business Daily that Operation Linda and Chi has apparently failed. These are important aspects. I don't believe that the administration police, who are brave because they go out there, I don't believe they're properly trained in counter-ambush techniques. I don't believe they're properly armed. The fact that there was a lorry grinding along out there so close to the Somali border with officers on the back doing what? You don't go on patrol in a lorry. And I believe that we need better training, and we may need to bring in outsiders to
try
train
and fix this.
And mentor our people
Andrew, we need to wind this up because of time. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on KTN Prime. Byron Adera, ex-Special Forces, thank you so much. Andrew Franklin, our resident security analyst, and Peter Alingo from Institute for Security Studies. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on KTN Prime tonight. And of course, at our I&M studio, we had Masood Mwenye, spokesperson, National Police Service. We thank you for joining us on KTN Prime. Now, let me take you over to Nancy. And there has been some new development at the coast with regard to the fight against terror and a focus on security for that matter. Nancy.